Video game hype is the biggest double-edged sword in the industry. On the one hand, though it does happen less and less with the amount of broken day one games there are, we love getting carried away on a wave of screenshots, trailers, and gameplay snippets, imagining what it'll actually be like to finally play ourselves. Come launch, either that energy pays off or it falls apart entirely, the rubber meeting the road or the road not loading in whatsoever. Sometimes that road is now attached to a season pass and you might get it the following year. However, what about those games that received significant work or reappreciation post-launch, that were overlooked by the vast majority at the time? I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com and these are 9 divisive video games that are secretly the best entry. Number 9. Star Wars Battlefront 2. At launch, it was a laughingstock, the poster boy for everything wrong with the gaming industry across the second half of the 2010s. And whilst there were still some highlights like the new Starfighter Assault mode and a fun enough campaign to blast through, the amount of sheer negativity that surrounded Battlefront 2 tanked sales, so at the center of a political storm about child gambling, and made millions of us look the other way. As the vast majority moved on and Star Wars as an IP stepped on as many rakes as possible, DICE made a point of overhauling and refining the experience. By focusing on hefty free content updates, removing pay-to-win elements, and highlighting those already exquisite large-scale battles, Battlefront 2 fast became and still is one of the absolute best Star Wars games of all time. Comprising characters, voice casts, levels, and costumes from all 3 main trilogies and even the Clone Wars, Battlefront 2 did finally get there, it just took some time. Number 8. Batman Arkham Origins. Not taking anything away from just how seismic Arkham Asylum was, but if we're looking at the full franchise, the entirety of their scope, Batman's entire range of abilities, and sheer bang for your buck, Arkham Origins just edges it out. Why? Because although Batman was fine enough in the main trilogy, here he's a walking haymaker. Bruce Wayne's infancy as the Dark Knight is immediately engaging, and when he's not tussling with Alfred over the moralities of putting half of Gotham's criminals in the hospital, he's breaking into the GCPD to get answers for the next plot point. Couple this with an ability system you'll only unlock if you experiment with Batman's entire arsenal, procedurally generated crimes where you save police and Gotham citizens, and a challenge mode where you can play as Deathstroke, and it's a mighty meaty package. Even Origins DLC is a cut above the array of premium skins and challenge maps that made up the core trilogy. Cold Heart is a Mr. Freeze-centric tale with a killer atmosphere, awesome level design, and a great new suit for Bruce. Sure, the game's reputation is the odd one out, and even Rockstar neglected to acknowledge it in Arkham Knight's credits, but there's so much to love here, especially if you're a Batman fan. Number 7. Watch Dogs 2. Following up on Watch Dogs was like that Nendry and Dodgson scene from Jurassic Park. Ubisoft could scream all day long about more Watch Dogs, but people aggressively did not care. Still, right off the bat, Marcus Holloway is a more energetic and memorable presence on screen than the dour, mopey Adrian Pierce, and the game invests entirely in a caricatured version of San Francisco. Tech culture abounds, you can infiltrate a fake Google, and there's a man-bunned, yoga-posing CEO as the main villain. The best thing was your ability to hack into literally every object. Whilst it's not exactly realistic, suddenly you could remotely tell cars to reverse into enemies, rig steam grates to send goons sailing across the map, or just pilot your remote RC car through a warehouse to complete the mission for you. Watch Dogs 2 honed that sense of technology, tipping the balance in your favor that the original lacked. And with some genuinely stunning graphics, this is a super fun cyber-infused romp with a far more manageable scale than Watch Dogs Legion, one that you can pick up for very cheap today. Number 6. Fallout New Vegas. Obsidian have always been a stellar RPG developer, but even they couldn't turn around a full Fallout game in the painfully restrictive 18-month development window that they were given by Bethesda. The result was one of the most legendarily broken games of all time, but thankfully for those who could look past the rotating heads, was a game with endless incredible ideas. The way Obsidian designs RPGs just plays more directly into what the genre actually stands for: role-playing. Off the bat, we have a character with history in the world, a number of factions to befriend or pit against one another, far more in-depth dialogue options, a much more driven story, and failable missions that change what happens across the rest of the game. At this stage, it's one for down in the comments as to whether New Vegas does beat Fallout 3 or 4 to you, but for myself and many of the WhatCulture Gaming gang, it's not even close. Number 5. Rainbow Six Siege. Back when it first dropped in 2015, Rainbow Six Siege was a shell of its expected self. The single-player campaign boiled down to a glorified tutorial for multiplayer, and whilst you could see something great was at the core, microtransactions and a lack of memorable enemy encounters and characters dragged the whole production down. Considering Siege was following on from the immaculate Vegas games, the common perception was that Ubisoft had messed things up yet again, and many moved on. Thankfully, the following years saw massive overhauls to the game's monetary elements, dialing back microtransactions, introducing various starter versions so you could play with a reduced roster, and giving the game some of the most satisfyingly intense maps in FPS history. With a better progression system, so many approaches to a given scenario, and blink and you're dead allocations of health, Siege is still going strong to this day. Number 4, Heavy Rain. Though not a numbered series of games, it's long been believed that all of David Cage's titles take place in the same timeline. Evidence such as the Origami Killer being mentioned in Beyond Two Souls, or various references to Fahrenheit/Indigo Prophecy in Detroit Become Human are just two things tying it all together. Point being, Cage is pretty much the M. Night Shyamalan of games, and though Heavy Rain's Jason scene became the stuff of memeable legend, the game overall is by far his most solid work. With Detroit Become Human fracturing faces with its on-the-nose approach to discussions of racial inequality, and Beyond Two Souls falling apart in the back third, Heavy Rain is practically a David Fincher detective game, or the nearest we're ever gonna get without him. Trying to solve the case of the Origami Killer in Rain-Swept Philadelphia, Heavy Rain mercifully doesn't fall back on a catch-all supernatural element to wrap everything up, as is Cage's want in almost everything he writes. Yes, the final killer twist can feel forced, but to me it always made enough sense to be satisfying, topping off a brilliant story that feels like Saw meets Seven. Number 3, The Last Guardian. Another trilogy of titles that didn't get numbered as they rolled out, yet all form part of the same story, mythology, and rule set are Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and The Last Guardian. Now, The Last Guardian always appeared to get short-thrift. The victim of a 10-year development cycle meant an entire generation of people were barely sentient when its first teasers started to drop. However, taking stock now, it's one of the most unique adventure games you can play. Centered on an unknown child and a large cat, dog, bird, beast thing called Trico, the genius to the game's design comes through a very natural sense of bonding with the beast itself. You'll start out struggling to get Trico to listen to commands, only to know exactly when to call for aid, seeing the creature swoop in and wipe out an entire platoon of enemies with one claw swipe. If you're a dog or cat person, it feels like a gamified version of building that kinship with your pet in real life, requiring patience, intuition, and payoff in equal measure. Number 2, Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus. Wolfenstein's second rebooted installment has the weirdest reputation today, in that for every person you find who adored it, like me, there are 3 more who just can't put their finger on what fell off, but something did. Let's stick to the positives though. First up, it's absolutely stunning. Everything from character models to barrel explosions really leap off the screen. Second, you have the build-up and payoff of BJ Blazkowicz going from down-and-out recovering soldier to a super-suited tank of a man in the second half. A notably bold script delves into how a Nazi-ruled America might look in governance and media, with another beast of a Mick Gordon score powering the whole thing. Lastly, this might have the single best use of Hitler, if that's a category, in gaming, icing off a perfectly paced narrative that hits every beat with supreme confidence. The less said about the song that hits on the credits though, the better. And number 1, Max Payne 3. Possibly the most unfairly treated game of Rockstar's entire catalogue, and certainly of the 2010s, I too was more than guilty of screaming, "What the hell have they done?" when that first batch of screenshots showed a Hawaiian-shirted, totally bald Max Payne, as it couldn't have been further from what Remedy began in the original 2 games. Divorce yourself from those expectations though, and this is one of Dan Houser's best scripts. Max is every bit the wisecracking noir machine of yesteryear, but refined with some supremely dark comedic tones, a sardonic sensibility, and even a nihilistic edge that lets you know he thinks his whole life is a joke too. It's the gunplay though that excels above all else. Rockstar would put every ounce of their budget into developing a physics-heavy system where every bullet matters. Even Max's hulking frame has real momentum and needs to be piloted through the chaos. Leaping into the air with twin pistols is a considered choice, as is playing the angles game and progressing more methodically, nailing headshots and riddling bodies in slow motion. Add gorgeous environmental effects to show everything off and an up-close camera that showboats however you finish the last goon in an encounter, and you have an outstanding third-person shooter with a career-best performance from James McCaffrey. And those are our picks for 9 divisive video games that are secretly the best entry. Let me know your own favourites down in the comments below, and please subscribe to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.